name is Harold Davis. I'm here to teach you about the art and craft of digital photography.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harold Davis Studio in Berkeley, California. We are so excited to have you with us today. Today's webinar is about fruits and vegetables on the lightbox. This webinar explores in depth the craft and art of photographing fruits and vegetables on the lightbox. Slicing, arrangement, composition, and exposure will be considered. Get out your camera and tripod, grab an apple, and get ready for some creative fun. Many of you know who Harold is, but if you're joining us for the first time today, here's a bit about Harold. Harold Davis is an artist, photographer, and author. His most recent books include Creative Black and White, 2nd edition, and Creative Garden Photography, both published by Rocky Nook. Harold is the developer of a unique technique for photographing flowers for transparency and an innovator of digital multi-raw processing and hand HDR processing. Harold is an internationally known photographer. His prints are widely collected, and he is a sought-after workshop leader. He is a Moab Master and a Zeiss Ambassador. Harold's website is digitalfieldguide.com. Now I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to Harold.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Phyllis. Thank you. So my experience with fruits and vegetables on the Lightbox is a relatively young thing for me. It's a pandemic experience. Back during the summer, a art director that I work with challenged me to produce. There was a call and a demand for images, I think, of pears in looking translucent on a Lightbox. So I said, why not? And we got to work. Phyllis helping me out on the technical side of thin slicing, which it turns out there is quite a bit of stuff involved in what knife you use, whether you partially freeze the fruits and vegetables, whether you put some lemon juice to prevent them going brown too quickly, and how quickly you have to do it. It's not dissimilar really from flowers on the Lightbox, but it's a whole other dimension. So I've had some fun from that original launch. With that said, Phyllis, could you run the movie? I've got my popcorn. Okay, so fruits and vegetables on the light box. If you're here for a black and white photography, well, that's next week. If you're here for flowers, well, that's the week after next. Maybe I've got the order wrong, but that's the general idea. And here's creative garden photography. No fruits and vegetables um, were affected for this book. I see a great video, Phyllis, there from Lynn, and I agree. Fun. Making great photos of flowers, gardens, landscapes, and the beautiful world around us. Here are some necessary tools. Well, we hope the bandage up the upper right corner is not necessary, although it did come up not during the making of this video, but during the many weeks of the pandemic we spent doing uh, fruits and vegetables on the light box. Uh, the device you see down below is a knife sharpener. It's really important to do this with a really sharp knife, and this thing works pretty easily as opposed to sharpening manually. The knife itself is a tempered steel with those little grooves to cut out the section, and I think the brand is Victorinox, the Swiss Aid brand. It pays to get a good knife for this kind of thing. Do you have anything else to say about the cutting implements, Phyllis?
Not really. Yeah, it's the Swiss Army knife company that, I just picked it out because of it's a Japanese style knife, and I picked it out because of the little grooves there. Because sometimes, when you're cutting things really closely, you'll get suction to the knife, and then if you pull it up, off the knife, it'll kind of ruin it. So those little grooves allow a little air in, so it doesn't get stuck on the knife blade. But that's it.
And here are two important implements. The thing at the bottom is called a mandolin, and so that is almost like a factory for slicing, right, Phyllis? You can also do julienne stuff this way, but that's not really what we've done on the Lightbox. Well, it's something to think about. The glove is really good because if you use that, you don't cut your hands, right, Phyllis?
Absolutely. And everybody, as someone who's Deborah says, please caution everyone to be very careful if they're going to use a mandolin. Yes, I have cut myself pretty badly sometimes once on it, and just being stupid
You
and
don't want to get your hand in that blade.
no, being stupid and tired. Don't do it when you're tired, and make sure you have a quiet space where no one's, going to bother you or anything. And you can just, I usually get my nose down to, where I can see where the blade is and my hands are, and I can just see what's going on. So, yeah, be very, very careful because those things are wicked sharp.
And
So,
also don't try to get too many slices out of it. Once it gets down and it's even halfway close to the blade, just say, okay, that's it.
yep. Yep, exactly. Yeah, and I don't even, the mandolins come with like a holder where you can like put the, fruit on or pin it on, and then you can use that. So that keeps your hand away from the blade. But unfortunately, the holder puts little pins down into the vegetables or fruits. So, it creates holes that you don't want to see on the light box. So I just have to, I have a glove on, and that glove is great. It'll keep you from, getting punctures or anything. So,
Yeah, Eileen, thank you. She
mm,
says she really appreciates the safety precautions. Personally, I can't emphasize it enough. Anything dealing with sharp blades is potentially dangerous, and w- um, the so please, please, please be cautious. The other Harold Davis wants to know brand of glove. Do we know that, Phyllis?
oh, I can find it. Just give me a minute. And oh yeah, it says Santoku knife. Yeah, here I have the
It is
links,
important. The knife style is important.
or at least that's what I picked. I mean, here's the links for the knife that I picked, and I'll go find the glove.
And it is a special glove. Use
Yeah,
the holder on the gloves. Sounds like we've got some experts on here who've learned the hard way, perhaps.
hopefully not. I hope not.
Deborah says she cut two fingers and had to
Ooh,
go to the ER.
oh, yuck.
Yeah. So I mean, there is really a safety issue here. I mean, look, I cut flowers sometimes when they go on the light box too, but um, Lori, I guess we could take lessons from your son on how to do this probably. Lori says that her son is a butcher. Okay, so, okay, come on, you can do this. This is the image that really got me started on this. Well, I guess with the pears, one thing we did with the slices is we coated them with lemon juice, right, Phyllis? I think we
Yes, we did. We, just always have a lemon there and you can make lemon juice with water and lemon juice. Or I would just take the lemon and, slice it down and cut it so it had a open edge and then just rub it on the fruit so that it doesn't go brown.
that's the point of the lemon juice, is to keep it from going brown, because which it does fairly fast as it oxidizes, and particularly once you put it on a light box with the heat from the light box, it gets worse. Here's a individual slice. How do you keep it from curling? Yeah, Bruce says knife in one hand, cut glove on the other. That would be right. Yeah, because the glove is holding the object, and that's where you can get cut. How do you keep it from curling? Well, with some of these, and I was going to get to that, you partially freeze it. And that's about the only thing I can say about that. Otherwise, just like flowers that curl, what I sometimes do with those is I put a weight on them and on the light box, and after a while they relax. Any other comments on that, Phyllis?
No, not really. I think you've covered it, Harold.
Harold, the other Harold Davis, the other Harold Davis. Once I always find that so hard to adjust to. There's two of me out here. Anyhow, he wants to know thickness of slice, and honestly, the thinner the slice, the better the translucence. So as thin as possible. That's where the mandolin comes in, though. Yeah, from Princeton, no less. It's so funny. Uh, So, the mandolin can really get out thin slices in a way that's awfully hard with a hand knife. I mean, unless one goes and does like vegetable sushi or something. These were nominally pink apples, and I called this one. There's always one in every bunch because I put the one with the stem up there when I photographed it. And one of the things one deals with flower photography on Lightbox is basically the patterns of composition. And here in both the initial pair and this one, you see one of the patterns of composition here, which is simply a mass of substance. Here's a mass of kiwis. Phyllis, any comments on which easier or harder to slice?
Um,
From my viewpoint, the translucence is a key issue, and everything I've shown you so far is relatively translucent.
right. Kiwis are actually pretty good. You have to be careful because you have to have how did I cut the kiwis? I actually had to cut the kiwis with a knife because they were too squishy to put on the mandolin. The mandolin was smushing them. So I had to be really careful. Another one that's really easy with the mandolin are radishes because they're very firm and they're easy to get really thin and translucent. Apples too. Uh,
Bruce wants to know, how do you protect the light box from juice? And the answer really is that you don't, right? I mean, once you put a piece of fruit on a light box, it's likely to leave some juice.
right.
Um,
But it doesn't really hurt the light box surface. And we found that cleaning the light box, if it gets sticky stuff on it that you can't get off, we found that rubbing alcohol will clean off the light box surface, the plastic surface, really well.
I've always had the philosophy that equipment is meant to be used, so that means I will take my camera out in, in a sandstorm on a sand dune, and I'll take it out, on a beach where there's surf blowing in. This is sort of a corollary of the Ansel Adams. If you don't go out in the rain, you'll never photograph a clearing storm. So, I'm not going to worry too much about my light box. Um, and I see one of our can, though just getting back to the ripe fruit question, if it's too ripe, you're probably not going to be able to cut it into slices nicely. if I had a piece of fruit that was uh, too light, I would consider partially freezing it to get it to someplace where it would be reasonably cuttable and usable. Yeah, there's also an FAQ about light boxes on our website that, and going along with that are a plans for building your own as well. And generally, the bigger the better. So this image positively makes me cry to even look at, right? Um, onions are really nice. They're really patterned. They can be sliced thinly, but it's definitely a weeping affair. Phyllis, the knife is about, maybe the blade's about
It's 7 inches.
7 inches. And possibly for this use, it could be a little bit smaller, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is just the knife I picked because I thought, if it's Swiss Army knife, it's going to be sharp. And then also I liked the idea. I had never had dealt with a Santoku knife before. And so, the sort of straightness of the blade was really helpful. There's no serration. And, I thought maybe that was a way I could get this really thin and close. So that was my trier, and it worked out. I got lucky.
We have a very, very nice lemon tree in our backyard that's got a lot of lemons on it, almost always, 12 months a year. And here's one of them sliced on the light box. And this, I guess for the lemon, that we did partly freeze it, right, Phyllis?
No, I don't think we did. It was the grapes
Oh,
and
the grapes we certainly froze.
the little mini tomatoes, the little cherry tomatoes.
Hmm.
Definitely, because they're just too smushy. Yeah.
And there's something about the curves of the onion that are so wonderfully fractal. This particular lemon slice had something really going for it too. Now, speaking of smushy, here we get into smush land, right? This was a tomato. This one was from our pandemic garden, I think, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't think we didn't have to freeze this one. It was pretty hard, because we picked it early. And so I just cut it with the knife as thin as I could.
It's like a hieroglyph. I mean, the best of these have a sort of alphabet look to them. And then a mandala is a nice pattern for these things. You see tomato slices, lime slices, pears, and what are the slight pieces of pepper are the radiant things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're yellow pepper.
Yeah. This is an atomic cucumber. Again, with tomatoes, green tomatoes, red tomatoes, I believe.
And the cucumbers are those little Persian cucumbers, and they're sliced really well. They're great for a nice, thin, easy slice.
This is a whole salad here. So this is primarily apple slices arranged in a circular pattern with lime slices. And note that the lime slices are cut in two directions, which is something to consider, that with a lot of these fruits, you can cut them two ways. You saw that in the video that Phyllis made. One of the radishes there was cut in one direction for circular ones, and the other cut the other way for oblong pieces. And here with this one, it's a multimedia affair. Not only are there radishes and beets and kiwis, but there also are pebbles. So I don't think I would eat this one really. On the whole, we found that eating the fruits and vegetables off the light box isn't such a good idea. What I thought here was that the pattern of the negative space inside the apple slices matched the and this is just iPhone snapshot of radishes, slices, and some of what you get, some of what you have to work with. Ah, well, sorry, niece. Yes. Um,
Harold, that's a
are,
nice photo because that shows all the Band-Aids we have that we haven't used.
there you go.
There you go.
It's not true, but it's fun.
And yes, Harold, we'll talk about Mallory has a question. Will you be talking about taking the photos or mostly just about fruits and vegetables and how to slice?
We'll get to some more technical stuff, Mallory, in a bit. Generally, the way I like to do these, I mean, generally the composition is the most important part of anything as far as I'm concerned. And with something that's as unusual really as fruits and vegetables on the light box, I like to sort of present the conclusion, where you're doing it and why and how you might compose it. But then, yes, I also do like to show taking the photos. On the other hand, you should look at this webinar as a supplement to the many recordings that we have available about how to do flowers on a light box. So I'm not going to go through all the basics of doing a high key HDR sequence on a light box. I'll show some of the exposures and answer any questions and talk about how to process them. But you may want to supplement the material here with some of the other recordings that we have up and available. So the thing about something like peppers is that they have so much empty space. So when I was setting up the composition here, I tried to arrange it so that some of the top stems were hooked and going through the flowers themselves. Grapes, as Phyllis mentioned, we needed to freeze before we could actually get them on the light box. And here are some apple slices arranged in a grid pattern. Here's an LAB partial color rendering of some of the slices. And here's the L channel inversion of this. You saw this in the video. And discount code on garden photography, how to get hold of me, and questions. Phyllis, will you run that video again before I get to showing some exposure sequences and processing?
Are you sure?
Yeah, I am so positive.
Okay.
I have to see it again.
All right, just a second. Let me get myself set up here.
I really do love that. But part of one of the reasons I wanted to show it again were to see the sequence of exposure stuff in which we in purpose put out the exposure settings. Let's look at those exposures here um, in Bridge. So they're all at f16 ISO 64, and they're all using a 55 millimeter prime lens, the Zeiss Otis in this case. And if you looked at the video, you saw that my camera was perpendicular, straight down on the subject. And so that was actually the actual taking of these images. There's nothing faked or put into the video about it. I made the images exactly that way. So the geometry of this is that you need to be, like as with flower photography on a light box, you mostly want to be looking straight down on whatever it is on the light box with the camera on a good firm tripod right above it. And you want to photograph from where your meter tells you is the proper exposure, which will give you this gray kind of look in the background, to where everything is almost all white. And here's the final exposure here. I think it's the final at 3 seconds. So I've prepared from those raw files, I've prepared low resolution, low bit depth version, because otherwise it's excruciating on my laptop over Zoom watching me process this stuff, and who wants to be excruciating? So let me open up the lightest, the 3 second exposure first, like this. Here it is in Photoshop. Just to eschew a confusion, I'll put it in the center like this. Everyone can see this, right? If you can't see it, well, I think you can see it. So I'm going to sample my background color here, which is not exactly white, but is pretty close to white. And by sampling it, it becomes the foreground color. And I'm going to pick my brush tool, and I need to get my toolbar up. And I'm going to paint out the parts of the tripod down there. One of the nice things about this set of techniques is that you don't need to have you don't need to worry about anything intruding into the bottom of your screen. You can just paint it out on your lightermost layer like that. And then I'm going to go and, oops, wrong thing. And pull up Adobe Bridge again and go to my next layer. This is the 1.6 exposure. And I'm going to align it with the layer below it. So, and then I'm going to shut it down. So let's label these so we know what we're doing. We're going to call this 3 seconds. We're going to call this 1.6 seconds. And what I'm now going to do is create a layer mask for the 1.6 seconds one that I can use for the layers that go on up above it as well. The good news here is that with something like a daikon radish, and a spiral like this, the units are so discrete, meaning they're so separate that it's easy to create a layer mask. Layer mask, hide all. And I'm going to take my brush tool and I'm going to make it just about the size of this this smallest icon. Now what I want here is I want a nice hard brush so that I don't spread gray beyond it. I've got my opacity at 100%, my flow at 100%, and I want to make it a little smaller. I can do that with the left bracket tool. I can make it a little smaller, There, that's about right. And I'm just going to open up my history window unless it's behind here. No, it's not. Window, history, and I'm going to take that up because I didn't quite mean to do that yet. And now I'm going to make sure I'm painting on the layer mask. I go like that, and then I'm going to paint in this one. I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to keep going around my spiral. What you'll see when we end this part of it is that I've got a layer mask that is pretty much exactly like the spiral of daikon radishes here. This. So takes a little time to do this, but really you don't even have to be that careful at this point of things. So let's have a look at what that layer mask actually looks like. I hold down the Alt key and I click the layer mask thumbnail, and there you see it. The idea of having gaps in the layer mask between the areas that you want to have in the layer are to avoid things that are like gray in it. So let's open up the next layer. This would be 4/5 of a second. One thing to keep in mind here is that you don't necessarily have to use all the layers that you photographed. I photograph as many layers as I photograph at 1 EV intervals. So each exposure is half or twice, depending upon which you go of the last one. But on these sequences, whether it be flowers or vegetables, I don't necessarily use them all. This time to copy it over, I'm going to go select all, edit, copy, and then I go to my target and I go edit, paste. And then I'm going to shut down this one, and this is 0.8 of a sec. I don't have to draw a new layer mask here. I hold down the Alt key and I pull my other layer mask on top. Questions about this so far? Good. I think that we're almost there with this, actually. I think we do one more layer and we've got a pretty good approximation of this stage of this image. So let me go and get that. You can see as it gets darker, the white is no longer pure white. It's actually becoming slightly bluish. That's part of why you want to use a layer mask on this thing. This time I have the Move tool selected. I hold down the Shift key. I click in the source. I drag it over the target. I let go of the mouse and I let go of the Shift key. The order of that's important or it doesn't work. This is 0.4 of a second. And again, I'm going to pull my layer mask up over it. So here you go. Let's go back to where we were at the beginning. 3 seconds. I'm going to disable this layer mask for a minute. So here's putting the 1.6 second over the 3 second one. Here's the layer mask that, as you can see, I pretty quickly and roughly drew. Here's the 0.8 second. Here's the 0.4 seconds. In some ways, something like this is easier than most flowers to draw like this on the light box with the separate layers because it is such a single unit of things. For my money, there's a bit too much of the top layer in this one, so I'm going to take down the overall opacity of the layer here to about 60%. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to archive, save the layered document. I'm going to flatten it, and let's crop a bit off it. I'm ignoring the steps here that would involve saving things, perhaps doing this with a bit more refinement because, this is real time and who wants to do it? Perhaps crop it about like that to even up the right side and the left side. There you go. Now let's look at something that Phyllis showed in the video, which was turning this into a white on black composition. The first thing I'm going to do that is go Image, Mode, LAB Color. So I'm now converted my image from the RGB color space to the LAB color space. On my channels panel, I make sure the lightness channel is selected. I make sure that I can see all three channels by putting the eyeball column over here. And I go Image, Adjustment, Invert. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now, let's get this to be a little bit lighter. So, or rather, I should say, get the daikon radish slices on the black background to be a bit lighter. Of course, there are a number of ways we can go about doing this, but one of my favorites is to go Image, Adjustment, Curves, and make sure the lightness channel is selected in the channel drop-down box, and pull up the lightness just like that. You can even pull it a little more if you want. And then in the layers, oops, I made a mistake here, so that happens. What I need to do before I do that is I need to duplicate my layer so that I can do this selectively. So I go Layer, Duplicate Layer. I'll say that this one's going to be a curve adjustment. Go Image, Adjustment, Curves. And here I pull this way to the left, the lightness channel. That's making the lightness channel, cutting down the black information extremely. The black background's still black, but the things are not. The daikon radishes are not. And to finish this off, what I would do is I go Layer, Layer Mask, Hide All, and then I take my brush, but this time this time I'm going to put my flow down a bit to 50%, and I'm going to put my opacity like this, and bingo, you kind of got what and to take this back into the RGB color space, you go Flatten Image, Image Mode, RGB, and if you want to make it the icons even lighter still, you can go Layer, Duplicate Layer, put the duplicate into the screen blending mode, like that, put another Hide All Layer Mask on it, Layer, Layer Mask, Hide All, and maybe put the opacity at about 50% and paint in some of the darker areas. Okay, are there any questions about this example?
We'll give folks a minute to type, see if there's anything that comes up. Harold, I don't know if I see anything yet.
Okay, well, let's see. I've got a bunch of other examples. So, I mean, everybody, I expect to see a lot of fruit stuff sent to us on the Lightbox with LAB inversions. Let's see. Got kiwis. Don't remember what that one. Got a bunch of onions. Oh yeah, 3 pairs. That's kind of fun. So the 3 pairs were photographed down on my using my 85 millimeter tilt shift Nikkor macro specialty lens. I don't think they make it anymore. I do like using it for macro work. Um, but it records, when it's stopped down, it records the EXIF at f64. So these are all with the 85 millimeter macro, f64, ISO 64 on a tripod, straight down, using the same kind of configuration you've seen so far. And here we go, 13 seconds, 6 seconds, 3 seconds, 1.6 seconds, 0.8 of a second, and that's it. And again, I prepared low resolution versions of this. So let's open up the 13-second version. Before I shut down the last one and lose all the history and everything, any questions about that? Last chance, going. Speak now or forever hold your daikon radishes. Okay. Truth is, I could probably get back there fairly fast. First of all, I want to say, if you just look at the outline of something like this pair, the outline is very cool. You don't have to see the inside of a fruit to get something interesting. And also, to some extent, translucency, which is what this technique is about, is something of an illusion. The illusion of translucency is made by a contrast of lights and darks. So sometimes when you're, quote, too light, as this exposure definitely is, you get a neat translucent effect, like right here in the pairs. So that was 13 seconds. Let's open up the 6-second one. Give me a second here to get a little organized. 13 seconds. And let's see, we'll close this down so it's not in our way. We'll make this a little bit smaller, like that. And we'll copy 13 second. Oops, I named the wrong one. This one is 13 seconds. This one was 8 seconds. I'm gonna copy it over like that. Close it down, don't save it. It's not 13 seconds, it's actually 8. Okay, so layer mask, hide all. And then I don't want to paint the stems in, they're dark enough, but I'm going to paint in the rest of my pairs. And note that I'm going to use full flow and full opacity, even though that may be too much. And the reason that I do that is because that creates a generally applicable layer mask, even if I end up needing to take down the overall opacity of the layer. Okay. Which I probably would up further on this. Incidentally, you can go to this and you can paint in on the layer mask directly, which can be a helpful thing if you want to just make sure that you've got everything in the middle, like a shape like these pairs. Okay, so here we go. Nice mask, nice pairs. Let's go and grab the 4-second exposure. Okay. And I'm going to pull up the layer mask over it like that. And then I am going to take down the opacity of the 4-second one, like about that. I do note that I've got a little bit of a gap at the bottom down there. So let me fix that right along here. Okay. Happens sometimes when you're doing these things too fast. Could also try a stylus rather than the mouse for getting this right. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to just show, in real life, I would probably go a little bit further with more layers of this, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to show you a couple of things about these pear slices. Layer, flatten image. Okay, I would have archived it before I flattened it in real life. The first thing I'm going to do here is I've indicated that, as I've indicated, or as I said, it's a complex thought going, which really goes back to the Renaissance development of painting that has an illusion of depth and translucency, and that is that translucency is created by the contrast of lights and darks. So you could increase that here with a darker layer of the same thing and a lighter layer. Let's look at that in action. So layer, duplicate layer, and I am going to put a lighter layer in on the middle pair. I'm going to put it into screen blending mode, and layer mask, hide all. So let me paint it in a little bit of a bigger brush. I don't need so much hardness on my brush. I'm putting the hardness down to 12%. I'm putting the opacity and flow down to 50%. And I'm going to paint, everybody see that? I'm painting the meat of the middle pear slice somewhat lighter. And then I'm going to paint the overlap a little bit darker. So I can do that by going layer, duplicate layer, and pull the duplicate up to the top. We're going to call this one darker. Should have called this one lighter, but let's do it now. Going to put it into multiply blending mode like that. Okay, you can really see some more of the detail in the pear now. Layer, layer mask, hide all. And then what I'm going to do is this is a Venn diagram. This is the intersection of the pairs. I'm going to paint in the parts where they intersect like this. I think part of the point here is not to overdo it, but let's just take this apart so you can see what I just did. Okay. So the point here is to create an illusion of more translucency by letting the pear come through at the bottom. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to also paint some lightness in around. Oops. You can be careful to paint on the thumbnail of the mask, not on the layer itself. Okay, like perhaps that. So can everyone see? Let me zoom in on it. See how the translucency of the pear itself becomes enhanced by painting both darker and lighter. How did we get a stem for each pear? A question from the audience. Phyllis, how did we get a stem for each pear slice? Any
Well,
idea? I think it just came that way from the factory.
I'm the factory, huh?
No, the fruit tree is the factory.
The fruit tree. Actually, the stem is really difficult to cut and keep whole. The mandolin was I use the mandolin to slice the pear, and you have to be really careful when you're getting the stem like into the blade, because when it could kind of like pull the stem off or rip it. And so I was very careful to kind of inch it in there. And one I had was so tough that the mandolin wouldn't even get close. So I got an X-Acto blade and I very carefully just nicked, the start of the cut that the mandolin would do to get it going, and then the mandolin finished it. But we might have had one or two that fell off, and you just placed it there,
Yeah,
maybe.
maybe. But Harold, this is one pear, three slices. And so these are slices of the stems. And Phyllis is right. I'm perfectly capable of placing a stem there. It's possible that that one on the left, that doesn't look entirely kosher to me, of these three, may just have been placed there. And okay, so if so, I'm flattening down this layer. If so, if you look right over here, um, that I might want to get rid of that. I can just quickly clone it out. Something like that. Okay, you can be a little more careful in real life, but that makes it look like a part of it. It's funny because the next thing I was going to show with this image was exactly making it more perfect in Photoshop, which is so if you look over here, um, you know, that one seed is awfully unsymmetrical looking. It's a nice seed. I like the seed, but let's get it a brother. Don't you think, Phyllis? Company is good. So I'm going to duplicate my image like that. And to make it go roughly in the right direction, I'm going to need to rotate the image, rotation, flip it horizontally. Okay. Now, I don't really need the whole image if I'm just after the pear there. And it's easier to work with if you just have a small piece of it. So I'm going to crop down about like this. For some reason, here we go. The thing from Zoom was overshadowing Photoshop. And now I'm going to pull it into place here. To see what you're doing with this, you have to put the or one way to see it. Photoshop always has 25 million ways to do everything, and there's not necessarily one way that's best. You need to put the opacity down so that you can actually see both layers, so you can see where you want it. Actually, that looks pretty gosh darn good to me. Maybe just down a little. And I wouldn't mind rotating it just a little bit. So that's on the transform menu. Image, transform, rotate, like that. And click OK for the rotation. Put the opacity back up to 100%. Put a hide all layer mask on it. Layer mask, hide all. One of the tricks of this kind of compositing, if it counts as a trick, is to get up really close to what you want to composite in. From a distance, you may not see this stuff, but even if you don't see it, it at least is subliminally there. So it's important to get close enough to really see what you're doing. I want to be fairly hard here, so I'm putting my hardness to 26%, and that looks like a pretty good amount and I think that I'm more or less got it here. I'm going to want to make my brush a little smaller so that I can get around the edges. And there we go. Now that should do the trick. Tell me the truth. Do you think you'd know that there was only one seed in that pear? Any questions about this? Phyllis, do you think we have time for one more, or on this weekend of all weekends, should we stop right here with success and take any questions?
How about, well, I'd say let's put it out to our audience. Would you like one more, folks? Or shall we call it a day?
I'm compositing. One more, says I. Well, anything for Eileen.
Always one more, please.
Okay. The if you're interested in the basics of compositing, I'm going to recommend our book, The Photoshop Darkroom 2, which has something in it called the Compositor's Cafe. Do you remember that, Phyllis?
I sure do.
Yeah, so we wrote out a menu of the possible techniques for this kind of compositing. You want to put a link up for that, maybe?
Yes, I will. Just give me a minute. I'll find it.
Sure. Okay, let's go to this one, pink apples. So what I have here is a grid of apples photographed as it happens by the Zeiss 50mm 2 macro lens. Again, positioned down, you can see the tripod leg to the left of this thing. Note an important point is that the camera mount is vertical in the tripod holder. It just makes it easier to center it over the position. I use an L bracket on my camera, which also makes it easier. Yeah, there's a reason with the Photoshop Darkroom 2 we called it Creative Digital Transformations, because fundamentally that's what it's about. So at f13 you have 1 second, half a second, a quarter of a second, an eighth of a second, a 15th of a second, a 30th of a second. Honestly, a 30th of a second is not going to be of any use to me. 15th may not be either. So really what I'm going to be interested in here are the three brighter exposures, the quarter of a second. I mean that, well, actually the 1 second, the half a second, the quarter of a second, and the eighth of a second. Beyond that, it's pretty much like, who needs it? Because you've got all the apple slice here. And part of the point of an image like this, besides the grid of these apples, is how different the center becomes when it falls out like that in the slices. So again, I did a low res set of these, and let's open up the 1 second version. Lenses, lenses, lenses. Well, the pairs were with a macro lens, and there it's simply, if your subject matter is closer in like that, you probably want to work with a macro lens. You know, mostly on the light box, I use the Zeiss Otis 55. What you want is a prime lens. I don't know why it happened that I used the 50mm f2 Zeiss on this one, but I think maybe it was handy in my camera bag. But that's also a really beautiful lens. Just the lenses I love most. That's a fair categorization. The good thing about this kind of photography, or one of the good things, is it's right there in our case in our living room, in my studio. I don't have to worry about carrying this stuff on my back, which I'm asked the question, which is common in this kind of photography: is all the light coming from the backlighting, the light box, or is some of it coming from the front? It's an interesting question. For the most part, it's from the light box. The idea here is to create backlit translucent photography. To the extent that you have any light coming from the other side, you are going to be losing the point of the translucency. The more light that comes from the front, the less you get from behind it. However, sometimes it is necessary to light the front of things. With the case of this apples, it's almost all coming from the light box, almost all going through the object, actually. So here we are with our 1 second exposure. And let me paint out the elements of this thing that we don't really want in the image. That would be the tripod leg on the left, and you maybe can't see it all that well, but at the bottom of this image, there's a bit of the light box edge. Okay, opacity and flow at 100%. Hardness really doesn't matter too much here. Hardness really controls what the edge is going to be like. So it only really matters where edging is important.
Oh, Harold, Lori has a question.
Yeah.
She asks, so then based on that last question about the front backlight, do you do your light box photography in a darkened room or natural light?
Yes.
That's not an answer, Harold.
For the most part, I do it in a darkened room, but there is some ambient natural light there. I really love natural light on top of it, but it's almost always coming in through behind curtains. So often I control where it is through a little gap in the curtains or something. The one thing that can be problematic is if you don't really aren't able to make a room kind of dimmer and you have really strong sunlight coming in, that can actually compete with the light box and create reflections and shadows. So that's problematic. Otherwise, you just sort of try it and you get to know the light characteristics of the room you're working in. If I were designing a room for this from the ground up, let's say that my ship, the one that Phyllis and I like to say is sailing around out there in the world, comes in and I build a studio to my own specifications, I would totally be able to absolutely control the light coming into the room where I did this, from totally black to a fair amount of natural light coming in. And I would probably use it most of the time at about 90% darkened. But in real life, it's a little more complicated than that. Thank you, Laurie. So once again, with this grid, we're in a situation where it should be pretty easy to size a brush for it and just paint in the apples. I think I said before that you can use the square bracket tools to make a brush bigger and smaller, and you can do it visually that way, as well as so the right brush makes it bigger, the left brush makes it smaller. You can also control and option does the same thing. The red area is the area of the brush. So that's a little too big. Let's see, so the left bracket, that's too small. Well, just so 400, let's try it this way then. It's gonna be like that, is it? Yeah, that's about right. Okay, good, we're good. So layer mask, hide all. And just go bonk, bonk. You can hit it twice if you need to. Bonk, 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 bonk. Sometimes I even amuse myself. Okay, So there you go. Let's pull up the next layer. Quarter of a second, otherwise known as 0.25. Pull up my layer mask. Okay. And I think I'll just put a little bit of the next one in. This would be the 1/8 of a second one. You can see that the background is starting to go pretty blue here. And I'll pull over our layer mask and shut down the other layer, close that out, and put the opacity of this one down a good bit, like about so. And so that this is our layer stack. Yeah, Mallory, so let me just show you the mask here. Okay, so it's basically like a grid with I don't know, ping pong balls on it or something, and it's the same mask dragged up on all the layers. So there you go. Any further questions about the masking here, Mallory? Are you clear about it? Yeah, and you can drop us an email if this remains a subject of mystery. Okay, so I'm going to pull my layer down, flatten the image, and I will crop it over a little on the left because we're off balanced. Oh, just like that. And then one thing I want to do before I move on to the next step here is I want to straighten out my grid a little. You see how it's sort of wobbling down on this side? Let's pull it up. To use the transform menu here, we have to have another layer in play. So I'm going to go layer, new layer. That's fine. And I'm going to convert the background layer to a normal layer. Photoshop has a kink that a background layer is a special layer and you can't do everything on it that you can do on a normal layer. Edit, transform, and I'm going to use the old warp tool to just pull it up a little bit right here, just by eye, to get this grid more happily. I mean, you know, depending on your level of perfectionism, you can do this better or worse, but I just wanted to get it just a little bit straighter. So let's just look where we started. Here's it is before pulling it up, and here's after I pulled it up. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is, Phyllis mentioned in the chat box a while ago my LAB action. I'm going to run it on this thing. So the first thing I need to do is to convert it to LAB color, image, mode, LAB. And then on my actions panel, I will click LAB action. And it is to be noted that this software has been released into the wild. It's available for free. It's not supported. We don't do technical support on the LAB action, but it's fairly straightforward, and it does have a little piece of documentation with it, as well as webinars and a LinkedIn Learning course that I did. The adjustment that's involved is shown up on the bar here in this version of the action. So you can see they're pretty cool colors to choose from. It's sort of like Andy Warhol. Let's go to the L inversion here. And I showed you lightening up something like this before. Let's do it again. So I'm going to duplicate my layer, layer, duplicate layer, image, adjustment, curves. So, you know, my friend Stephen Christensen, with whom we're going to be doing a night photography webinar coming up in at the beginning of April, said to me, look, I don't use any other adjustments besides curves anymore because you can do everything with curves. Not quite true, but his point that you can do a tremendous amount of things with curves depending on what channel you position the curve on and how you draw the curve is really true. Layer, layer mask, hide all, and let's paint it in. We've already here. I'm going to do it at full 100% and then put down the layer opacity a bit. And you can see this is the kind of thing I was playing around with in the image that's behind me on the screen. So that's, I kind of wanted to show how I got there. These are apple slices, but at a certain point, you forget what they are. Okay, so let's see. I will take the opacity down to about that. That's a nice level, 70%. I'm going to go layer, flatten image, and I'm going to move it back into RGB. The point being that you cannot really go between color spaces with a layered document. So you've got to you've got to merge down in between switching color spaces. At least it's best practice to. You know, when you say you got, that's an imperative. And I don't mean to be imperative, but I mean to caution you that there are possibilities of odd color shifts if you don't do that. So let's put this layer on top of the base layer there. And let's go see what different blending modes do. For example, overlay, that's kind of cool. And oh, I like a solid red in my life. Layer, layer mask, hide all. Let's do this one in solid red, this one in solid red, this one in solid red, and this one in that red. Okay, and I'm gonna close out the lab inversion. Let's see, let's take the AB equalization and see what happens when we put that over here. Let's see, this was LAB inversion. This is ABEQ. Note it's a combination of the lab adjustments and the blending modes that make this kind of thing possible. That's what color burn looks like. Here's what screen looks like. Not very interesting. I'd like to keep a black background. Overlay is pretty cool though. Now let's see what we get with difference. The fact that here, that's difference is good. Let's see if we get anything better with exclusion. No, I like difference. The fact that it's so easy, oh, that is cool. The fact that it is so easy to, let's do one with difference like this, to do the apples as discrete things means it's possible to really play with this. Okay, we'll put one here like that, and one here like that, and one here like that. Now let's duplicate that layer, layer, duplicate layer. I'm going to take off my layer mask. I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to put in a divide in one of these things. Layer, layer mask, hide all. And where should we go with the divide? Right here. That's, oh, I like that. That's bold. Okay, let's do one more of these. Um, oh, let's try the L equal as, no, it's kind of, let's try the A inversion. Narrow screen. I mean, this does depend on what you want to end up with. If you want a pastel result in the end, that could be very nice, but it's going to be using a very different set of blending modes than, well, that's pretty cool just in and of itself. On, off. I kind of like that. Here's difference. No, doesn't work. Divide. Not bad, not bad. Saturation. Oh, green is good. This is the U blending mode. I, did have somebody say in the course that I did on this that, a lot of this is trial and error. You just tell people to try every blending mode and cycle through it. And, yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's close down the rest of the stuff and then just have a closer look at this. Certainly true that every time you do something like this, you're going to end up with a different result. That's why it's kind of important to note what you're doing via the layers or some other form of documentation, so that if by any chance you do want to get back here, you can. I think there's still something open behind here. Yes, an A-B equalization. That was kind of cool, that one. Okay, so what we have here started with the straight inversion of the apples. It came on white. We put it on black. Then we added a row of apples from the LAB inversion adjustment in difference blending mode. Then we just added a few loose apples from the AB equalization and difference, and a few in AB divide, that's the light blue ones, and then the top, the nice green, which is the A inversion in the U blending mode. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Be creative and stay mighty.